Hi everyone, welcome back to Poems That Changed Me. This is week 2 of October, which is Bay Area Poetry Month. I'm celebrating today's poet by wearing my t-shirt with the skyline of San Francisco boldly emblazoned on the front with the reflection of the city in the bay. Though I'm not sure geographically that works quite right, but metaphorically I'm totally on board. I'm super excited about today's poem. It's by the poet Shurin, who is a former colleague of mine at the University of San Francisco and really one of the great poets of the city. If you don't know his work, I would highly recommend that you check it out. His book, Unbound, a book of AIDS, came out in the late 90s and was really one of the first groundbreaking books on the AIDS epidemic. This particular poem I'm going to read is from his wonderful collection called Adore, which, if I'm correct, came out right around the turn of the century. I'm going to say 2000. And this poem is called The Bride of Frank, and it's a prose poem, but it is so lyrically beautiful. I'm just going to read it. And I've done this with students before, don't look at the poem while I read, just close your eyes. And if you hadn't seen the poem, how would you imagine that this poem appears on the page? We were application, aerial shapes investigating their causes as they unfolded their wandering life, possessed of temper, parents, talent, fancy, in books in which characters redeem being from the hands of infidels. I feel soaring pleasure. When I was 13, I opened My Father, title page of my book, to explain exploded powers warmed by a glance, to penetrate the ocean behind the elements and give names, fidelity, from a stream of fire reduced to electricity, over the malignity of an alarming bed, the brightness of a familiar eye commences connection. These are the faces cooped up in one place, in his sweetest voice hiding how the blood circulates, and my peculiar trembled body, the seat of beauty. At the end of 2 years, every object inherited human feelings. I paused, and brain exemplified generation, his child pursuing these reflections, my pale cheek and tremendous secrets of fingers. Winter, spring passed. Watch the blossom. It breathed hard, convulsive muscles of pearly whiteness, with his watery eyes disturbed by the first kiss traversing my bedchamber. His eyes held up the curtain of the bed. I remained listening, unfinished. My food, its white steeple, drenched by the rain. We ascended into my room, putting my hands before my eyes tingle, save me and save me. Anticipated with such nervous joy, I became capable of shooting forth from the trees. It was a divine spring. That night, drawing me out, I felt the sensation of others. When shown the body, they saw permission. I believe in innocent, notwithstanding temptation. Whom you loved was a creature who'd fill the air with birds serving you, feelings worked up by events, to wean us from our future prospects toward a tenderness of fainting limbs, a type of me. I was encompassed by a bodily cloud. I remained rushing at the window. They congregated around me, the unstained pinnacle. I arrived at the same lulling sounds, the giver of oblivion. The ascent is solemn, curling in wreaths. I sat upon the glittering peaks, swelled with sunlight over your narrow beds. I beheld the figure of a man at some distance. As he approached, a mist came over my eyes. You are community. Instinctively lying down, I covered myself with little winged animals light from my eyes. Spreading my cloak, I covered the ground. One part was open. It was a paradise filled with milk. Uttering a few sounds, the young man had been filled up. I awoke into my voice by his means. Sun on the red leaves, mounted high in the heavens, using gesticulations and a gush of tears. feelings of kindness and gentleness overcame me. Fringed by deep lashes, I contemplated my companion. That's a really beautiful poem. This poem, I remember reading it probably not long after I arrived in San Francisco, 2002, 2003 maybe, and really being amazed by the visual and oral incongruities. The semiotics of prose indicates to us discursive language. The slow unfolding, perhaps even prosaic, that word exists for a reason, nature of language, which is complete in its sentence structure and adhering to the traditional rules of grammar. However, this particular poem, although it is rendered in prose and your eye indicates its proseness, when you read it, it is the most glorious embodiment of lyric beauty. And so you feel with your ear that you are reading a traditional lineated poem. And I remember just loving how these two things were sort of mashed together, that Aaron chose prose for lyric articulation. And I love that those two things, those two expectations, right? We bring one set of expectations to a lineated lyric poem. We bring another set of expectations to prose. And those two expectations are clashing here. And my brain was just electrified by this. The other thing that this poem really did for me is I have just always been so confused by this poem in the most glorious way. There are confusing pronouns. There's the you, there's the he, there's the I. I never know exactly what's going on in this poem. I just know that I am in it. The poem pulls me in it in a very interesting way. Another thing that I love about this poem is it seems to me to be a poem that is groping toward what it means to be a poet, the awakening of a poet. There is this line that I've always really loved: to wean us from our future prospects toward a tenderness of fainting limbs, a type of me. And I love the play, whether intentional or not, on that word type. Literally like a typewriter, a font of me. And I think that gets re-encoded a little bit when he says in the last stanza, I awoke into my voice by his means. There is this sense of finding the voice as a poet. And in finding that voice is the embodiment of glory. This is a glorious poem that celebrates poetry, that celebrates becoming, that celebrates articulation. This poem really changed a lot for me, as did working with Aaron at the University of San Francisco. I really loved all of our time together, and I love this work.